All right, so here we go. All right, with us today we have Jono Bacon from Canonical. Can you please just give your intro, like what you do at Canonical and stuff like that?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Jono. I work at Canonical. I've been there for about 7 years. I work as the Ubuntu community manager. So I started out, when I joined Canonical back then, started out working for Mark Shuttleworth, who founded the project. These days I report to the VP of Ubuntu engineering. So Rick Spencer, he basically runs all of the Ubuntu engineering for the things that you see on your phone, tablet, right, TV, desktop, that kind of stuff. My team's responsibility is to build a fun and productive community in which people can participate in lots of different areas, whether it's programming or whether it's documentation or translations or advocacy or whatever it might be. Yep.
Right. So first question I have then is, why does community matter to programmers? Like if I want to start an open source project, I can just code something and put it on GitHub and just leave it. Like, why should I care about building community?
I think that's a great question. I think there's a couple of reasons why it's important. One is you get more code. Like you end up writing more code if you collaborate around it. The other thing as well is that traditionally the way it works is you scratch your own itch. You write a piece of code, you put it up on GitHub or wherever it might be, and then you invite people to write patches and they contribute to them, and that's fun. But the act of merging in somebody else's branch for the very first time is like a real buzz. Like it's a lot of fun, and it makes software development more fun and interesting. Because my theory here is that there's two types of programmer. There's hackers and there's maintainers, right? I'm a hacker. Like, I love writing new code. I love working on new projects. As soon as they hit 1.0, I suddenly lose all interest. That's the reason why my Launchpad profile is littered with dead projects from yesteryear, because I enjoy the thrill of writing something new. Mm-hmm. But that's the reason why I think collaborating in communities means that you get both mindsets, and it's made me a better programmer. Like, so I never did any kind of test-driven development. But then my most recent set of projects wouldn't land anything unless there was a test attached to, associated with it as well. So
a lot of our listeners are programmers, of course, because otherwise they wouldn't listen to this podcast. But I think most of them are working in a professional environment,
Right.
Not so. I think some of them have open source experience, but for a lot of our listeners, I think they are more the kind of guy goes to work, does his code, he's told to, and that's it.
Yeah.
So I think many of them sometimes wonder, what's the point of open source code, and why should you, as a programmer, is there any inherent value in releasing your code open source, or is that just for the other guys that have too much spare time?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'd say there's a couple of approaches to this. There are some people for whom the reason to open source it is purely ethical. And they wouldn't call it open source, they call it free software. So for those folks, it's like, you should do it because if you don't do it, it's bad. Mm-hmm. I don't really subscribe to that viewpoint as much. I think that I can't think of a situation where not open sourcing something wouldn't be anything but the best possible solution. Like, to me, open sourcing, it's good. And the reason why it's good is because it then becomes part of a commons. Like, if I write a piece of code and I don't open source it, it is fundamentally bottlenecked by me. Like, if I lose interest, I don't have time, then it dies. Whereas when you open source it, it lives on. I'll give you one tiny example. Years ago, when I started going out and doing presentations at conferences, I would record all of my talks on my laptop while I was doing it. And I'd have my slides, and I thought, I wish there was a piece of software that could take my audio and a PDF of my slides, and maybe I could note down when the slide changes happen, and then it could generate a flash file that I could put on my website. And I wrote this 60-line Python script called Raccoon Show, and never used it again. Like, it did what I wanted it to do. A guy emailed me like a week ago and said, "Could you relicense it because he wanted to work on a new version of it or something like that." If that wasn't open source, that would never have happened. And to me, that's a tiny example of why open source is a good thing.
Right. And for me, it's also about bettering yourself as a programmer. Like,
totally.
Putting it out there, showing that, this is code that I'm kind of proud of?
Well, I'd say it's not even just code that you're proud of, but it's other people help. Like, I'm not a good programmer. I'll be honest with you. I'm not a particularly great programmer. I think I'm okay. Like, I can write code that works, but every piece of code I've ever written, somebody else has told me how to do it better. And that's made me a better programmer. If I didn't engage in a collaborative process, I will be the crappy programmer that I was back in 1998.
Right. We wanted to talk a bit about the Ubuntu Touch, because that's kind of a new thing from Canonical.
Oh, yeah.
And the first question we had there is, why would we as a programmers care about a new mobile platform when I think most of us are already invested in Android and iOS so heavily right now?
Yeah. There's a few reasons, I'd say. First of all, I think people are more passionate about writing software for platforms that they feel like they're more invested in whatever way, whether it's financially, whether it's emotionally, whatever. We're trying to build a better platform than Android, a better platform than iOS. I believe that what we've got is something that looks more beautiful than iOS. Content is better integrated. It's more open than Android. And we have a long heritage of building a very accessible community around Ubuntu. So I think the platform itself is one element of why it's attractive. The other reason is that we're really heavily focused on developers. So my team has the responsibility of building our developer community, and my mandate to my team is very clear. I want us to build the best developer story in the world. Like that's what we're setting out to do. So that's the reason why in the Ubuntu SDK, which you can get from developer.ubuntu.com, you can write apps with QML, which is part of Qt, which is a really nice declarative language for you can produce really nice apps, and it's got the full Qt APIs to things like location and PIM and multimedia and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But then you can write apps in HTML5 as well, and then we use Cordova to access, which is more commonly known as PhoneGap, to access the device sensors, and then JavaScript to access the platform APIs.
Okay, so you can write the HTML5 apps, and it's kind of running native.
Exactly.
Right.
And the plan is that, so right now, if you write a HTML5 app, it's kind of a bit like Firefox in the fact that it's effectively a WebKit container. Firefox don't use WebKit, but it's the equivalent of a WebKit container, and it sits inside that container. It doesn't live outside of it.
Yeah.
Whereas our HTML5 support that we're about to finish will give full access to all the platform services. So it'll be written in HTML5, but for all intents and purposes, it'll look and feel like a native app.
Right. So one thing that annoys me with Android is that you have to write it in Java, which I really don't like. And QML is also kind of a high-level language, but is it possible to write? Will you allow writing apps in C or C++ and low-level code?
So you can. What's really neat about QML is that you can write plugins in C++. So QML basically has a set of APIs that are basically APIs that are implemented in C++ in Qt. So, for example, I can use the QML API to access multimedia, and that connects to a Qt C++ plugin that then talks to the platform, which is GStreamer. So if you want to access something else in the platform, then you can write it in C++ directly. You could write an application in direct C++. You could write the whole thing in C++ if you want to.
Right.
So you can get that breakneck speed if you want.
Yeah.
We're also at the beginning of adding Go support. So a lot of people are interested in Go.
Yeah.
A guy who works for Canonical called Gustavo Niemeyer, he's basically built QML and Go support, which means that you can essentially write UI. You can write user interface applications with Go, and it's very early. We haven't released it yet.
Yeah.
But it's really neat. And Go is an awesome language.
Yeah. Talking about it we had an episode about Go a while ago, and it's just going nuts.
Well, we all of our, for example, our Juju, our cloud orchestration platform, that's written in Go. We're basically writing all new platform services for the phone in Go, and we have all the pieces. We just need to assemble them together into the SDK.
Right. Yeah.
So another thing we've been talking about on our podcast is that both me and Christopher right now is working remote. He's working for SUSE, and I'm working for an American company called Plex, which is also an open source platform.
Right.
So this is also seems to be pretty common at Canonical. Do you see that as a good solution or just some necessary evil, like the working remote stuff?
It's a bit of both. It's not for everybody. Some people work from home and they hate it. We've had people join Canonical who work from home and they miss that interaction in the office. Some people love it. Like, speaking personally, I love working from home. Mm-hmm. I get to listen to heavy metal all day. I get to see my son. Like, I get to wear shorts. Like, I and I'm just way more productive in an office.
Get to not wear shorts.
Yeah, exactly. I can wear nothing if I want to. But the thing is that what I think is important. So my entire team work from home, and we use Google Plus Hangouts to spend time with each other. We use conference calls where necessary. I believe that we are more productive as a team working remotely than that we would be if we were sat in the same office. Yeah. Because when you're at the office, people are a lot more distracted, I think, which arguably is more fun. But we have as much fun with each other remotely. Like, as an example, I have a weekly call with my team that deliberately has no agenda, just so we can hang out as a group. And we always talk about work, but I think getting people together on a fairly regular basis is important. You got to have a sprint or something every so often, because I just think you need to have a couple of beers with each other and just kind of, that kind of social interaction as well.
Yeah. Yeah, one thing I felt is that you kind of have to at least meet people once in the beginning, so you kind of have a face to the name.
Yeah.
And, like, get some kind of sense of who they are.
Yeah, I mean, there's a guy on my team. He was working for me for 7 months before I even met him, which was odd. I mean, I met him on Google Plus and all the rest of it. So, I mean, he wasn't that different in real life.
Right. But there is something, when someone is like a real 3D character. Like, you
exactly.
Like, oh, okay. So
hang on, he can punch me?
Right. Oh, yeah.
So let's go to some other questions. Like, there has been a lot of talk at this conference about privacy and security, and I mean, we live in a post-Snowden world, as many refer to. Like, things have changed on the ground. Do you see this as an inherent advantage for open source projects like Canonical and Ubuntu? Because there has been a lot of questions asked to Apple and Microsoft how much they have been involved, and they don't have that kind of transparency as you see in a Canonical open source world.
I think it's a really complicated topic because the difficulty about privacy is that it's everyone's definition of privacy is different. So, as an example, you might have somebody, let's call him Joe, who has a Facebook profile and posts pictures of his babies and his wife and his family and whoever else on there, and is always talking about what he's doing. You may have somebody else, let's call her Josephine, who maybe doesn't want to have the Facebook profile, not just because of, I don't want Facebook to have my information, but I don't want the world to have my information, right? Yeah. There's people who don't like to see their pictures on the Google Images search, as an example. To me, those two different people have got two very different approaches to privacy, and neither of those two people are wrong, right? So the challenge that companies have is you have to set some kind of line of what privacy looks like, and there will always be people who don't like that. The Snowden thing, I think, has brought a healthy level of paranoia and an unhealthy level of paranoia to the mix.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some people out there who, it's funny because I just think to myself, dude, you're not that interesting, right?
Right.
No one cares that much about your life to snoop into it. But the core of the issue is fair and sound. We've had our own challenges with Ubuntu. I mean, we have the dash, and some people were very, very frustrated because they felt like, okay, I don't expect you guys to do searches and to display results from these different services, and it goes through a Canonical server.
Yeah. And
every single one of the concerns that people raised with us, we fixed. Like, everything's encrypted, we encrypt the images, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So, but people are still not happy. Some people are still not happy. But my job isn't to tell them that they're wrong, because at the end of the day, if they don't want, if they want to be able to search in the dash and it doesn't go through that that technology.
Yeah.
That's who am I to tell them that they're wrong because they don't want that? But that's the reason why we have an off button.
Right.
The problem is that some people say, well, the off button is not enough. It should not be on by default.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a misguided perspective, because if we don't switch it on by default, no one will ever switch it on.
Yeah.
And it's a really key feature in Ubuntu. So
Power of default.
right. Yeah, and it's, I don't know. It's, again, everyone's got their own perspective. My view is no one's wrong on this.
Yeah.
The people who are wrong are the people who are overly aggressive in the way that they engage in the discussion.
So that brings up an interesting issue, I think, that you have in open source communities. That it's very easy to, when you have a community at a certain size, that you get this kind of vocal minority that kind of dominates the discussion, but it's not really representative. Like, if there's people who are really unhappy about something, they're gonna talk about it really loudly, and over and over. And to some extent, you kind of, when you're managing a project, at some point you just gotta say, like, I'm just gonna ignore those people. Like, how do you manage that balance?
I've been doing this now for 15 years, and I still wrestle with it. It's tough because, I mean, some people are just assholes. I mean, it's just like some people are just grade A, copper bottom, 24 karat gold assholes out there. And my view is, like, I'm out there to support the good people. And to help the good people do good work, and there will always be people out there who are going to be negative, who are going to be critical, and I think that's just a defect in human beings.
Right.
The challenge is that the people who behave this way, because they're cowards and they hide behind the internet, they can be very disruptive. And what worries me less, and what worries me more, is not about me. Like, I've got a thick skin. People can say what the hell they want about me. And people do. What worries me is the average community contributor who joins the project, who doesn't have a thick skin, who gets really demotivated because these people are acting like dicks. And to be very clear, my definition of someone who's acting like a bit of a dick is not somebody who disagrees with us. It's the conduct in the way they do it. Like, when people start calling people names. I mean, there was one person recently on a blog post, on a comment, like, told the founder of our company to go to hell. And I was like, really? like really? And my view is that person who has that response, they've run out of ideas. Like, people who turn to belittling other people, they've run out of ideas. My theory as well is that there's like a graduation of how much people are assholes. So, at the top, like, people, like, the most civil places are generally, I think, mailing lists and places like that. And then it gets worse on Reddit. And then the bottom of the barrel is YouTube comments. Like,
so that was amazing recently that they actually managed to make it worse.
Because of the Google Plus stuff.
How could they possibly have done that? You would think they hit the bottom, but no.
I mean, I don't think I've ever watched a YouTube video where there hasn't been someone arguing about Hitler in the comments.
Oh, it's crazy.
Right, so to round it off, because we have another interview soon, but we heard on the latest show of High Voltage, I think.
Bad Voltage,
yeah, Bad Voltage.
Wow, thanks for checking it out.
You were talking about the new consoles.
Yes,
the PS4 and the Expo.
Oh yeah.
And we were wondering, how do you see SteamOS figuring into that picture? Because it's the first time we see, like, a much more open platform that could be used as a console, high-grade console, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting what Valve are doing, I think. I mean, they're clearly setting themselves up to be a big player in the gaming world. I think I just like them as a company, is one of the things. Like, from my perspective, we didn't factor them into the discussion in Bad Voltage because they're not releasing something as urgently as PlayStation and as Sony and Microsoft are. I don't know if they're going to be able to stand up to the PS4 and the Xbox One in terms of widespread adoption.
Right.
Not for the first generation. I think they're going to take on, like that Nvidia handheld thing that they've got. The Shield, yeah. I think they're going to start competing with things like... It wouldn't surprise me if they take like a cutout of Nintendo's business.
Right.
But it's not just like... I mean, people are so entrenched in Sony and Microsoft.
But they do seem to be focused on the hardcore gaming audience.
Yeah.
It's not. They're not doing it like a handheld console.
That's true. I mean, so if they're going to go up against anyone, it's going to be Sony. Because, I mean, the Xbox One is basically a glorified cable box, from what I understand.
Right, yeah.
Whereas Sony are really trying to go after the, like, hardcore gamer, you know, with, like, shorter thumbs because they've been playing for so long. I don't know. I mean... They definitely want to keep an eye on. I'm hoping they're going to send me one so we can do a review on the show, but we'll see. If you're listening, Valve,
send us one too.
Send this show one and send us one, and maybe we'll do like a compare and contrast. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. For
taking
the time.
I really appreciate the invitation to come on the show, and all the best for the future.
Let me put it this way, Mr. Raymer. The 9000 series is the most reliable computer ever made. No 9000 computer has ever made a mistake or distorted information. We are all, by any practical definition of the words, foolproof and incapable of error.